Hello, good day, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to our study and reflection series, Kaya. We are now on the fifth episode of our series and going through the third part of our study in chapter 1 of Genesis. If we really think about it, chapter 1 alone of Genesis is, this book of beginnings is quite a gold mine of innumerable insights, lessons that you can always dig out of every verse. It has endless resources for the rebuilding and reinforcing the foundations of our faith. You can never really run out of insights that you can discern from any given text here. And you can never go wrong if you will only spend time regularly with any given passage on a text like this, of Genesis or any other book of the Bible for that matter. One concern that has been raised by my Old Testament students before was the perception of many people about the possible conflict between the story of creation, as we have been discussing it, as related in Genesis 1, and the scientific theories on the beginnings of life here on earth. They were saying, would there not be a conflict between science with its popular theory of the evolution of species, or even the Big Bang theory on the origin of the universe, and the biblical story of creation as seen in Genesis 1. We need to clarify the proper relationship of one with the other. First, we should not automatically assume that there is a conflict between science and the Bible, or science and religion for that matter, as far as the story of beginnings is concerned. Second, we should not think of science as something that presents an alternative way to understanding the story of our beginnings or the story of creation. And third, we should remember that science is simply part of God's creation, a gift to humankind and a tool for advancing the knowledge and well-being of humanity. Although science can also be an instrument for destruction and wicked schemes, it really depends on how we use it. There is actually no conflict. Science has its own discourse and methods at arriving at new knowledge and new findings. It has its own language of precise scientific methodology involving careful observation, investigation, experimentation, and research that are defined by strict parameters with objectivity, detachment, and careful planning. What science tries to present about the beginnings of life and of the human being is more about the process of their emergence in the stage of history. It intends to answer one basic question, that of how. How did all these things begin to appear and evolve towards a higher level of existence and consciousness that we now have? And the answers and theories are arrived at through the application of such scientific methodology. The concern, however, of our text in Genesis 1 starts on the most fundamental question that is answered immediately right in Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, who? Who is the one behind all these elements of creation? This is the one question that cannot be answered by science, even by the most rigorous of scientific research and experimentation. The other question in which our biblical story is most interested in is the question, why? Why did God take all the initiative to carry out such an amazing creative activity? What is God's purpose behind the creation of the universe and the human being? These are questions about the issue of the meaning of existence and the purpose of life. These are questions which science cannot provide any answer at all. But somehow we can discern the possible answers right from our study of Genesis 1, as we did in the previous episode. We really have to make a clear distinction between the language of science and the language of faith, which is the one we see in our creation story. Genesis 1 is actually written in the language of confession, as in a liturgical act. It is a confession of faith in a God who is the source and foundation of all beginnings, the one that holds and sustains all things together in heaven and on earth, and the one that provides the true and lasting meaning of our life's existence. In and through His Son, Jesus Christ, we find the real and authentic purpose of our life. So let us just put aside this perception of a conflict supposedly between science and the Bible and religion, where there is no conflict at all. Rather, one actually contributes to the better understanding of the other. Okay? So now we go to the most important creation God has ever undertaken. The creation of the human as male and female, as seen in verses 26 and 27 in Genesis 1. Actually, the earlier creative acts done by God from day 1 to day 6 may be seen as preparatory to the main thing God wants to bring into existence. It is just setting the stage for the appearance of the most beautiful and most noble of all of God's creatures, the human being. And in an unprecedented manner, the creation of the human being is accompanied by the divine declaration that the human will be created in nothing else but in the image of the Creator God. So God created humankind in His image. In the image of God, He created them male and female. This characteristic of the human is what supposedly will distinguish the human being from the rest of God's creation. For no other creature has been granted this kind of quality as a creature bearing the image of the Creator. What then could be the meaning and significance of this very special declaration of God about the human being? If you will recall, Israel's covenant tradition with God had bound them to a covenant among the many covenants that defines well the character of the God they worship. As it says in Exodus chapter 20 verse 4, "You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or that is under in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." Throughout the history of Israel's faith, the people have always resisted the temptation of acquiring objects that will symbolize the image of God they worship, especially during the very trying times of their exile in Babylon, where the images of the Babylonian gods can be seen everywhere. In Canaan, the popular deity Baal has been depicted in the image of a bull. And in the Assyrian and Babylonian tradition, the god Marduk is represented as a snake dragon, while the god Shamash is portrayed in the image of the sun. And the image of the moon represents the moon god Sin. And the stars stand for the star god Ishtar. So, each deity is represented by a certain image or object, be it an animal or a celestial object or anything else. But the God of Israel is a God that cannot be symbolized by any of His creatures. God is simply above and beyond any representation that can be conceived by the human mind, because this God is above all creatures. Why should God be represented in the image of one of His own creatures? And there is nothing in this world that can adequately represent or signify the being and presence of God. God is just too transcendent, a God who is completely set apart and so other than us. One who is considered as the holy other. Sa Binisaya pa, dili ingon nato, or not like ours. And therefore, His image or His being and reality can never be captured nor be represented by anything here on earth or in heaven. That is why inside the temple in Jerusalem, before it was destroyed by the Babylonians, there was nothing that stands at the worship center in the holiest place, the Holy of Holies, except for that box, the Ark of the Covenant, which is believed to be simply the throne of the invisible God watching over His people. So, if God cannot be depicted in any kind of image or likeness in heaven or here on earth, how then can we imagine the very presence of God in our midst? Our creation story provides the very clear answer. God's own image and likeness can be seen right in the presence of each human being. Yes, there is one creature allowed by God to bear His own image in a very special way. Each human being is the bearer of that divine image here on earth. In the human being who exercises his gift of freedom, power and responsibility, faithfulness and graciousness, love, forgiveness and acceptance, there we can have an experience of the presence of God in our life. Therefore, each human being is called to serve as the very mirror of God's presence in this world. Each one has to mirror that distinctive image of a God who cares, a God who loves and nurtures well His own creation, a God who will do everything for the good and well-being of His own creation, and never for its destruction. This is what makes us humans distinct from all other creatures. Our God-given gift as bearers of God's image.
capable of loving, caring, nurturing, preserving the rest of God's creation, while at the same time deriving so much joy and delight in it. And take note, the bearer of God's image is not just male human being, but both male and female human beings were created equally as bearers of God's image. There is no distinction here, no patriarchy, nor hierarchy of one over the other ever pronounced by the Creator. Both male and female are to carry out tasks, duties, and responsibilities that will be reflective of their being responsible bearers of God's image. Equality of male and female is already decreed right at the moment of their creation. Lastly, gender distinction between male and female, however, does not mean that God being the Creator also has gender or sex identity. No, God is above and transcendent over all these things. But God gave the gift of gender and sex to the human being for them to enjoy and cherish God's gift and the means by which they can co-create the rest of the human community. A community of those who would be fellow bearers of God's image. We will talk more about this in chapter 2 of this book of Genesis. Next week, we will talk about the sacred responsibility given to the humans as stewards or caretakers of the rest of God's creation. So please continue to read Genesis 1 verses 28 to up to chapter 2 verse 4a. Thank you very much for watching, and God bless everyone.